Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Florence and to my studio. This is the beginning of Kronos. During this series, each episode will encompass a certain number of days, a set of days. This way you can know exactly where I am as I progress through the sculpture. It'll take a while obviously, as this is a big sculpture. A lot of today is going to be a time lapse of me preparing the sculpture for when the model arrives. There's no need for me to spend precious model time adding clay to cover an armature that I know will need to be covered anyways. As you saw, this is day number 1, and I think today's video represents about 6 hours of work and around 75 kilos of clay applied. For those unfamiliar with this sculpture, this is going to be a sculpture of Kronos Devouring His Child, inspired by Goya's painting of Saturn devouring his child, which is the Roman version of the Greek myth of Kronos. The story is about, in simplified terms, how Kronos eats his children because a prophecy foretells that he will be usurped by one of them. And the usurper is Zeus, who is hidden away as a young child by his mother. I will be attempting to depict the moment Kronos devours one of his children. There are many reasons beyond the intriguing visuals that led me to try and make this sculpture. We will get back to these, I think, as we begin to approach the final piece, months or perhaps years from now. Quickly before we begin, I have to reach out and say thank you to all of my new patrons who's joined within the last few weeks. There's been a ton of you, and thank you so much for your support. This project has no funding other than the support you lend me, and the freedom to make whatever I want to make comes from you guys. So thank you so much. I hope the video is educational or at least inspirational for you. What you will be watching me do here today is blocking in the core of my figure, which of course takes a really long time because this sculpture is huge. One thing I recommend to anyone attempting figurative sculpture at any scale is to plan things out on paper or in your head. I have a very clear idea of what I aim to accomplish here today, and I've spent time going over how to accomplish it in my head. I've come prepared with a maquette that has the location of every bony point I want to place, and I have somewhat accurate measurements of these bony points as well, so I know at what height they need to be placed. I say somewhat accurate because I know that I will inevitably have to move some of what I place here today later on down the road. At this scale, I'll aim to be within a few centimeters of where I think things should end up. At a smaller scale, however, I might aim for something closer to a few millimeters in accuracy. But at this case, and at this scale, I have a lot more room to maneuver, and if I can get things within a few centimeters of where they should be, that's going to be good enough to begin with. So my aim is to cover the armature, or at least the core of the armature, which will sit inside the torso of my figure. This part of the armature can't go anywhere. It's plumber's piping, it's solid metal. So I have to make sure that my sculpture will sit nicely on top of it and not poke out in any place where I don't want it to poke out. The arms, legs, and head can move around as they are made of aluminum armature wire, and they can be bent in all sorts of directions, so I'm a little bit more flexible right there. In order for this to work out, I need to be able to draw the center line of my figure, which represents the spine traveling from the neck down into the pelvis. I need to be able to draw the center line and have it end up close to where the armature for the neck and head is. There is a real limit, even though I can move it, but there's a real limit to how far the armature for the head can be pushed to either side. So if I place my pelvis first too far to the right or to the left, I will end up with a neck that is not sitting in the middle of the spine. The pelvis will be represented by a box, and I have several other videos about this on the channel, so just have a look in the channel and look for videos with box in the title. To begin with, however, I'm not going to place this box. What I do have already is I have the angle of the box drawn out. I know more or less where it's placed in height, because I've measured, but the outside corners of my box, which represents the ACES points on my model's pelvis, have not been decided on yet, because they will potentially need to move left or right, depending on where I'll end up needing to place my centerline in order for the spine to hit the armature where the neck begins. Only once the centerline is established, in other words, drawn on the surface, drawn on the clay surface, will I grow my box to its final width. And I do instantly get the box to the final width that it needs to be at. And again, I have measurements for how big the box needs to be. I use the box to gauge and compare other elements of the figure using comparative measurements, and so there's no reason to underbuild my box. If the box is underbuilt, then obviously I can't properly do comparative measurements to it or do accurate comparative measurements to it. So I need the box at an accurate scale pretty much right from the beginning, once I'm confident that I can place it according to the centerline. I know that around my box there is also very little width to be added, because there is little width from the ACES point outwards on any person, but this also means it's easier to gauge that distance accurately, and so I don't have to worry too much about it. Shorter distances are easier to measure than longer ones. You can tell the length of a car fairly accurately, for example, but the length of a cruise ship, you'll have no chance at guessing that. Once the centerline and the box is there, and I think they are close to being in the right place, I can draw on a few other useful things. Things that will help me visualize my sculpture somewhere on this mess of clay. These are things like the length of the sternum, which I know, in my case, because I've measured it on my model and also on my maquette. Keep in mind, as I stated earlier, that all these measurements are subject to change. I think they are going to work out, and I hope they will work out, but I'm in no way, shape or form beholden to them, and if they need to change in order for the sculpture to be better, then I will change them in a heartbeat. In the case of the length of the sternum here, I actually did end up needing to change it. Measurements can only get you in the ballpark close when dealing with such complex subjects as the human body. A measurement might be thrown off by a slight movement from the model or a slight addition of volume to your sculpture. At the end of the day, no one will ever know if you didn't stick to your measurements 100%. The only thing they'll know is if the sculpture looks good or not. And that's really the only thing that you should care about, and that anybody else would care about, frankly, also. While it's still very early, I can begin to add some clay to the contours. From the front, I'm always in favor of having a little bit of width in order to have something to draw the internal information on, which you can then use to place the contour from the side views. The same thing goes for the side views for that matter, but I'm not really concerned with my side views just yet. The only thing I pay attention to at this stage regarding the side view is where the pit of the neck and the C7 is. Those are the 2 points at the end of the center line, at the end of the spine. The pit of the neck in the front of the body and the C7 on the back. Even this early on the process, I think that they should be placed so that they are at least pretty close to where they'll end up needing to be in the end. We are lacking in width, and so they can't be placed perfectly accurately. But I do my best to predict and anticipate where they'll end up and place them accordingly, so that I know that I have the opportunity later on to move them to where they need to be. From the side view, the pit of the neck should line up more or less with the corner of the box, or the ACES point of my model, which is what the corner of the box represents. Lining up these bony points is what's gonna begin to give you the gesture and the movement that you're after in your sculpture. The last thing I'll be attempting to get right today is twisting the box on the armature a little bit. In other words, making sure that the box is not sitting square to what you saw at the beginning, those 2 armature pipes inside the sculpture. And there's a reason for this. Normally, I'd prefer the box to be square to the sculpture's stand, which would correspond with the plumber's piping. But this sculpture twists. The ribcage and pelvis do not face in the same direction. They're sitting at a different plane. So if the ribcage twists a lot, there is a chance the plumber's piping would come out of the left side of the chest. Or at least there's a chance that there will be a large discrepancy in the mass of clay on either side of the ribcage, causing potentially one side of the ribcage to fall off because of lack of support. I want my solid armature, my plumber's piping armature, as centered as possible within my sculpture to limit any possible chance of something like this happening. So if I twist the pelvis a bit, so it's not sitting straight in relationship to those two armature poles, not sitting perpendicular to those two plumber's piping poles, then the ribcage can twist as well, which leaves the armature closer to being centered within my clay, carrying closer to equal amounts of clay and weight on either side. So what I'm doing is pushing what is the sculpture's left side of the box, the left side of the pelvis, forward and the right side backwards. For you guys watching, that is the right side forwards, the left side backwards. This makes it a bit harder to keep track of what the front plane of my sculpture's pelvis is, but I drew some lines in permanent marker on the base to try and make it easier to find as the project progresses and the box gets covered in the clay of the abdomen. It can be very hard to keep track of the front plane of the pelvis or box, and so keeping the box square to the front of the sculpture stand is a really useful tip in general. I did deviate from that here for the reasons I explained above, but this is a good trick that I would take advantage of in scenarios where it makes sense to do so. Lastly and finally, while the height of the box is not very important and is very flexible, I do really like to draw in a V shape from the two corners of the box, representing my model's aces points down to the pubic symphysis. The pubic symphysis is where the genitals begin, more or less, or you can also call it the crotch if you like. This V shape should bear close resemblance to the one you find on your model and will help you determine the height of the pelvis. The shape of this V is determined by the shape of the model's pelvis. Some V's will be flatter and more open, and some will be a little bit more sharp and tall. The bottom of the V, the pubic symphysis, is also useful because it tends to line up more or less with the greater trochanter, the placement of which we can usually see as a bump in the contour from the front at the top of the model's legs. And it's a very important landmark, and so it's good to be able to cross-reference it with a few other landmarks. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned a thing or two. Future episodes might encompass several days, or perhaps just one day if there's something particularly interesting going on that day. You'll find a lot more in-depth video detailing the procedure that I'm going through while sculpting and the procedure that I always use while sculpting on my Patreon page. So if you're interested in learning sculpture, head over there. For $5 or more, you will get access to all the videos I've uploaded so far, and there's more to come as well. The first series we are embarking on is the Beginner's Guide to Figure Sculpture. I'm super excited to finally be creating exclusive content for Patreon, and I hope you will be too and will take a look. The link to my Patreon page is in the description below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for a new video next Thursday. Hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button and share with your friends and family. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.